Tonight, packed show. Anthony Albanese's government now in freefall with its worst poll results since the election. It's tying now with the Liberals. We'll show you how it's lost everything and how much worse it could get. And if you want a reason for the government's collapse, another stuff up today, and now can't find one of the foreign criminals that released a week ago. If you could help, can you just give us a call? Also tonight, the French president's wife defends starting her affair with him when she was 40 and he her 15-year-old student. And how Israel is forced to give back Palestinian terrorists to get back the children taken hostage by Hamas. What a deal that is. Also, doctors of Victoria are given the power to hand transgender drugs to older teenagers without even needing a psychiatrist's approval. But first, to an abuse of power. Don't you hate it when people that you pay to do a job use that money and that position to preach their politics? Now, how often do you see that now? Invariably, it's from the left. I'll give you two examples where people should actually be sacked. The first, at the ABC. It's meant to be impartial because, of course, we all fund it. Instead, not only have some ABC staff now signed a petition demanding journalists treat Israeli spokesmen like they would Hamas terrorists, give them no more credibility than that. Check everything they say as if they're likely to lie. I'm also talking here about ABC people like Tony Armstrong and Benjamin Law and Jan Fran who've signed this disgusting petition. But then there's the ABC's Triple J presenter, Miss Kanina, who has now gone further. She identifies as Aboriginal and has hijacked her own show to preach support for the Palestinians and call for an end to Israel from the river to the sea. This is from a show on Thursday.
We just took a little break away from that energy to listen to the track we just played. It was a very important track, Long Live Palestine by the brother Low Key. Now, can you guys believe that this track came out in 2011, right? That's 12 years ago. 12 years ago. Yet somehow if you listen to that track, every single thing that that brother is talking about, you would think that he wrote it yesterday, because 12 years later, the genocide, the oppression and the continued hate towards Palestine people on their indigenous lands is wild. When is something going to change? When are we going to wake up? As an Aboriginal sovereign woman, I stand in solidarity with my brothers and sisters of Palestine. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Now, the stupidity there is one thing. You know, if she's Indigenous, she must support well, in fact, she should support the Jews who are Indigenous to Jerusalem, if you really have to play this insulting race politics. But no, it's the Palestinians, the brothers. But to actually use our ABC to broadcast that call to genocide, used by Hamas as well, from the river to the sea. No Israel from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, that's disgusting. Show her the door. Out. The ABC really has to draw a line here. But to another example of this abuse of the power that we all give to people who then preach their radical politics. This time it's members of inner Melbourne branches of the Australian Education Union. They've distributed this poster calling on teachers to wear a keffiyeh and protest it's again on the pro-Palestinian side and the anti-Israel side, right? It really is anti-Israel. But not just protests in their own time. These union members say, for instance, well, why don't you invite a Palestinian advocate to speak to your school? We should also light up our schools for Palestine. That's teachers treating their captive students in the class like pawns in their stupid, radical political game. It's the kind of indoctrination we've seen for years in schools of global warming, for instance, but now this. At least Victoria's new Deputy Premier, who's not of the Labor left, like the new Premier and like Daniel Andrews before her, says no way.
We're calling on all teachers that hold a privileged position to teach the curriculum in the classroom, not to be inviting strangers or political activists into the class. I reiterate, this action is divisive and inflammatory, and I condemn it.
But mystery solved. If you wondered where some of those students on last week's school strike for Palestine came from with their anti-Israel ideas and total ignorance of the facts, now you know.
What do you think of Hamas?
I think they're doing a good job.
I think they should stand up for what's right. They should protect our brothers and sisters in Palestine.
What do you think of Hamas? Hamas? What is that?
I mean, you've got to ask why people on the left are so in your face like this, so arrogant, like the priests who preach politics from the pulpit, or like the cast of the Sydney Theatre Company, again taxpayer funded, who the other day did a curtain call with some wearing a kind of kufiyas to support the Palestinian side in this war of civilization. I tell you, the cult of the primitive is back, promoted by people using your money and even your children now to push it. That arrogance mixed with such ignorance. Now, 2 weeks ago, I said the leadership of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was in crisis, a shambles. It was an early call, I know, but today's stunning news poll shows just how true that is. It was his worst poll yet, a big 4-point fall in the government's primary vote, which is now below what it was in the election, and now way behind the coalitions. The drop in the Labor vote, though, didn't all go to the coalition. It's still got work to do there. But the parties are now neck and neck after preferences. Labor propped up, of course, by the Greens. Now, like I say, stunning result after just 18 months in power, given that the Liberals looked for quite a while totally smashed. Now, just how it went so bad and so fast for Labor, well, so many reasons. Summed up, though, the government looks completely out of touch, often an ideological frolic, while Australians are getting poorer and more divided. For one, this government wasted more than a year of time and hundreds of millions of your dollars on The Voice. It also faffed around with global warming schemes, while, as you know, your power prices went up and up and up, 18% in a year. And then there were also the Prime Minister's trips overseas to deliver nothing much. But it's not just that. There are also now questions of ranking competence. Well, today I'll give you another amazing example. The government has had to release, as you know, we talked about it last week, well, now it's 138 detainees, an increase now, who were in immigration detention. They included murderers and rapists and a pedophile and even, would you believe, an assassin. Now, fine, it was the High Court that made it do that, but the government was totally unprepared, hadn't prepared for this at all, let them all loose without any proper controls at first or any monitoring. And today at a press conference, admitted that even now, after the coalition last week forced it to agree to mandatory ankle bracelets on these released detainees, even now 4 of these detainees not only said no, police are investigating, but one can't be found.
In one case that's been referred to the Australian Federal Police, we're still making attempts to contact that person.
Oh, so sorry, we've lost one of these foreign criminals we let go, but never mind. But to today, honestly, but today's poll, how and when did it go so bad for Anthony Albanese? Well, Tom Connell, who's a chief election analyst for Sky News, dug through some figures for us.
So it's 50-50. Labor has slid back 2% from the last news poll alone. That's a quick drop-off. What's happening? Labor's primary vote has been pretty consistently dropping off. It doesn't have to be high. The last election, 32.58, actually dropped out in that last election, and they still won the election. Then they got up to 39% in the honeymoon period in December 2022 in that news poll. They have lost 8% since, though. That's 1.4 million voters. That's a big drop. Peter Dutton, his net satisfaction, it's clearly not a big positive just yet. It's at -13. It's improved from -20, but it's much worse compared to just after the last election. So he's not popular right now, but nor is his opponent. Look at Anthony Albanese. He's at -13 today as well. He went from these highs of +35 just after the election. And note as well, just before the election, he was at Peter Dutton's levels now, -14 and -11. How this 50-50 result plays out, if there's a uniform swing, you'd see Labor on 72 votes, cobbling together a minority of some sort. The LNP, why are they so far behind at 50-50? These 6 independent or teal seats, traditionally coalition seats. So if they can win them back, they're actually a lot closer to Labor on that 2-party preferred result.
Joining me now is the panel, Michael Kroger, former Victorian Liberal President, Steve Conroy, former Labor Senator and Cabinet Minister. Steve, was it last week or maybe the week before as well? You laughed at this man when he bet you that Anthony Albanese could be a one-term Prime Minister.
I've still got my money on the table. I'm waiting for him to offer up
but surely
he'll match dinner.
You would not have expected 50-50 just 18 months after
No, I think the government, as they're going through this parliamentary sitting fortnight, would be disappointed with those numbers. I don't think there's any question about that. But I don't see Peter Dutton, as Tom's very good analysis there showed, the Liberals are sitting on 63. They're not even in kiwi of forming governments. Yeah, 63 seats in the House of Representatives. They're not within kiwi of forming governments. But that's not. That doesn't mean that the government doesn't need to have a good sit down and have a discussion about why our primary vote is back below just below the election that we won with the primary vote only 1 point higher. So it is still
but don't forget that primary vote was less than a third of voters. I mean, it was a very low primary vote to start with, and now it's under even that. Why has it gone so bad?
Well, I think the government have had a horror few weeks. I mean, you've had...
Yeah, but it doesn't come out of the clear blue sky.
Well, you know, High Court decisions did come out of the sky.
No,
a refugee boat turned up. That came out of the sky.
Why would it have turned up?
Then we've had the Reserve Bank making another completely moronic decision to put interest rates up just after they paused them for a month. And they've got no justification for doing it. So all of that together gives you a bit of the eye of a storm situation for the government.
Government's unlucky. Just unlucky.
Yeah, like Sevi Ballesteros, he used to say, the more I practice, the luckier I get. No, look, the government's losing on every issue. The disastrous voice, which has now still got 2 planks of it still to go. Immigration levels out of control, interest rates out of control, cost of living out of control. Too many trips people think he's taken overseas, boat arrivals, criminals being let out of jail, Bowen running into a fog on energy. They're losing on every single issue, Andrew. And this bloke, as I said last week, he only needs to lose 12 for Dutton to have a majority in the reps.
Well, so, only 12. 12 is a lot.
Well, 11 if you give us back Claire and Russell Broadbent's seat. It means he needs 11. So it goes from 57 to 68. He goes from 78 to 67, and then you count on the independents. He's got 4 Greens, but he might lose a few of those. I've got 6 where he can't win. Albanese can't win. There's 6 seats where he can't win, and he's in trouble in 14 or 15 others. So it's hard for Peter Dutton to get to 76, but he can certainly get into low 70s, more than Albanese, and then rely on the independents to make Prime Minister. The likelihood at this stage that the independents will be making a decision like they did a decade ago on who should be Prime Minister with neither. Well,
some of those teals say, "Oh, we're." But can I be as tough as you as I was on Steve? Labor lost 4 points, but the Liberals only gained 1 in the primary vote. So the voters saying, "Don't like Labor, but don't yet trust the Liberals." What do they need to do?
Well, they've got to release some policies. Of course, they're not necessarily going to us. We haven't released any policies yet. So when Peter Dutton does, and I hope it's sooner rather than later, they'll win more votes. But this notion about Dutton being unpopular, Thatcher was unpopular. So was Malcolm Fraser, John Howard, Tony Abbott. Find me ever.
What was Howard, Mr. 17%? Why does he bother?
Yeah,
of course, he lost the lead.
Why does he bother? John Howard.
But here's another thing. Labor lost a lot on the Voice, which was a complete frolic, total distraction. I wonder whether you could say exactly the same of Chris Bowen's global warming crusade, which just seeing power bills go through the roof. He doubled down last week, won't tell us how much it cost, off to a UN conference next month. I mean, there must be people in the Labor Party worried.
Well, I hope you
worried that it's gone way off the reservation.
I hope you keep focusing on climate change, Andrew, in the next 18 months, because this is an issue that the Liberals lost the last election on, and I would think that they will lose the next election if they focus on it. I think if they stick to cost of living, keep trying to blame Labor for interest rates and petrol prices.
Mate,
but I think
that's ahistorical.
If you can convince them, to stick on climate change, then I think you will lead them to another disastrous election loss.
Kevin Rudd lost his leadership on climate change. Julia Gillard lost her leadership in part because, the government I lead will not impose a carbon tax, right? She lost it. Malcolm Turnbull lost his leadership on global warming. I tell you what, And Tony Abbott won it on Axe the Tax, remember?
We went to the
Axe
last
carbon
election
tax.
on a carbon, on a
Morrison was so
climate
toast by
policy.
then, you could have promised a gorilla in every home and you still would have won. What do you make?
No, well, I don't agree. I think cost of living is obviously the biggest issue, and Albanese. The problem is, if you say to people, what is your impression of this government, they're going to say, what have they done? The most, the most obvious thing people will say is, yeah, he wasted $500 million on that voice, and he's still got a couple more things to go, and he's been overseas.
Michael, I haven't met one person since the voice vote was held that has mentioned the voice again. Not one person.
No, people are still waiting.
Shows how unimportant.
Well, don't worry. The treaty's coming, and reparations and the Makarrata Commission got to be coming soon. We're just waiting for the period of reflection to take place. So that's got to come back. And don't forget, he's effectively promised to go for a republic after the next election.
That's not going to.
This is where Albanese's completely lost touch with the working middle class. If Dutton's policies are directed towards the working middle class, he probably wins. I
think that'd probably be the case. Stephen Conroy, Michael Kroger, we shall see. Thank you both so much for your time. After the break, Israel's prisoner swap. How is freeing terrorist trash to get back children? I mean, journalists should be looking at this and making some conclusions. Plus, why this Greens leader is a disgrace and this police minister applauding the likes of him should resign. Now, one thing I think it has cost the Albanese government is its weak moral leadership during Israel's war against the Hamas terrorist group, which slaughtered 1,200 Israelis on October 7. It seems to be trying too hard not to upset its Muslim supporters by, defending Israel, even though race baiters, meanwhile, like Senator Lydia Thorpe, are throwing their support behind the Palestinians, playing with fire by trying to make their cause, the Aboriginal one, linked with their cause, the Palestinian ones. Like fighting those whitish colonialists together.
I haven't been able to go to Parliament to do my job and stand up against the racist colonial system that we have to endure in this country. We know your pain.
That person in our Parliament shames us all. Meanwhile, in Israel, the prisoner swaps continue. 3 exchanges so far. One more will come overnight tonight over a 4-day truce with an option for an extra day of truce for every 10 more hostages Hamas chooses to release. Now, one thing about this swap needs to be emphasised. The 50 Israeli hostages that Hamas is releasing are children and women, many very old women, all of them civilians. The 150 Palestinian prisoners that Israel is releasing in exchange include terrorists like these teenagers who just stabbed Jewish civilians, and this woman who stabbed an Israeli soldier in Jerusalem after saying she wanted to be a martyr, and this one disfigured when her suicide bombing attack got foiled, although an Israeli policeman is still in hospital. That difference in the quality of the release of the two sides says everything. Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of the Australian newspaper. Thank you so much for coming in. Look, there's now a lot of pressure on Israel to keep this 4-day truce going, and America's leaning on it, France is leaning on it, and almost like even if Hamas doesn't release hostages, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, Andrew, great to be with you, and I agree the Albanese government's response has been pretty dismal on this, really. It's just had no sense at all of what it's dealing with, no sense of the global crisis in anti-Semitism, no sense of the difference between a liberal democracy like Israel and a terrorist outfit like Hamas. I think Israel will keep the ceasefire going for as long as Hamas can deliver hostages. But I think Hamas has a difficulty locating all of the hostages. I think, sadly, I hope this is not true, but I think quite a lot of the hostages are dead. I think it's unlikely that Hamas will release any military-age men. And I think Israel has to go back and continue the job once the pause in fighting is over, because they can't operationally go back to a situation where Hamas controls Gaza right on their border. Otherwise, they're just asking for another October 7 down the track.
I wonder, Greg, it's very easy to be very depressed about what's going on, and Jews in particular have a lot to fear with the anti-Semitism around the world. But I wonder whether long-term Israel will win this and Hamas will be a terrible loser. I say that because, one, Israel's military campaign is going pretty well militarily. I know about the civilian deaths. But also, no big Muslim power has joined it in support. The only country to do so is Yemen with the Houthi rebels. Even Iran hasn't done an all-out attack, and Hezbollah in Lebanon hasn't. I think Israel might win this.
Well, I think you're right, Andrew. And in fact, that's a very acute point of analysis. When this started, a lot of analysts, myself included, feared that you might get a simultaneous big missile attack from Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Israel feared it.
Israel feared it. There was intelligence on the ground that Iran had instructed its militias in Iraq to go up to the border with Israel, and that militias in Syria were doing the same, preparatory to launching a lot of missiles. And then you had the Houthis, who are also Iranian proxies. But it seems to me at this stage we can make a provisional judgment. Iran doesn't want to risk what a strike on Israel would mean. And to give Biden his due, even though he's putting some pressure on the Israelis, he moved 2 aircraft carrier battle groups to the Mediterranean. And he said to the Iranians, if you attack Israel, we'll attack you. And even if you're Iran, you've got to take that seriously. So I think there's a real prospect that Israel will do what it needs to do here. And then it can't leave Gaza again for a long time after that. In fact, you know, to cast back into history, when Israel ran southern Lebanon with the South Lebanon Army, its own security situation was much better, and the circumstances for the Christians in southern Lebanon was much better than it is now under Hezbollah rule. And the tragic lesson over the last 15 years is that Israeli withdrawal does not produce peace or security.
And I think a lot of Arab states have looked at what Hamas has done and think, do we really want to be represented by people like that? I mean, I think even they are flinching from it. So long term, well, it's too early to be terribly hopeful, but still. Now, your piece on Saturday about the government's failure on, drawing a moral line here is brilliant. I urge people to read it. But let's talk about the Greens. I think they've been even far more disgusting. Voting against the motion condemning Hamas, can you believe that? That's what they actually did. Constantly accusing Israel of war crimes. And then Senator Mehreen Faruqi posing with a photo of students carrying signs like the one circled here, make the world clean, put Israel in the bin. I mean, like getting rid of a Jewish state is a hygiene matter. She has since deleted it. But I tell you what, the test is that she put it up in the first place.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more, Andrew. This is a disgusting and classical anti-Semitic trope. This shows the deep affiliation between the Greens and the Nazis. It's the same nihilist, hideous ideology. The Greens are a party of hatred and nihilism and extremism. They shame the Australian Parliament. You know, the ABC calls the ACT party, which has joined the New Zealand coalition, far right. They never refer to the Greens as far left.
I'm going to from now on. You're absolutely correct. That needs to be done. It needs to be called out. It is disgusting. It is pathetic. And I tell you what, Greg, for years we've had the argument, should the Liberals put the Greens last? And that argument's largely been won in the preference deals. The question now is, should Labor put the Greens last? That'll hurt them because they need the Greens. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.
Politicians pass laws expecting us to obey them, right? Even if we don't agree with them, because, well, it's got to be like that in a democracy, or else you get anarchy. You can't pick and choose. So I think our elected politicians have a special duty to themselves. Show respect for the laws that they themselves are passing and upholding, apparently, well, telling us to uphold. But 2 examples now of politicians showing such contempt for our laws, well, I think they shouldn't be in Parliament. The first, talking about the Greens leader Adam Bandt, who joined an unlawful blockade last week of our biggest coal port in Newcastle. And look at that hypocrite, in a canoe made of hydrocarbons with a life-saving vest made of hydrocarbons, demanding an end to hydrocarbons. But above all, there he is, breaking the law with a blockade. So why should I respect any law that Adam Bandt passes? Now, the other person is the New South Wales Police Minister, Yasmin Coatley, who last week again applauded people at that blockade, saying, I applaud people for getting involved. I think it's important that people are having these discussions. We all know where things are headed, which meant that her police on the weekend had to arrest more than 100 protesters to clear that port, protesters that their own minister had applauded. Joining me is Paul Toole, the New South Wales Opposition's police spokesman. Paul Toole, thank you for your time. How do you think a police minister can get away with applauding people at a blockade that a police then have to clear?
Well, I think, Andrew, it's absolutely disgusting. At the end of the day, we've got a police minister here saying that she applauds people for getting involved. I mean, this is a police minister who should understand that it is her role to back our police in, not to be the minister for protests here in this state. I mean, these protesters, they don't care about people's everyday lives. These are people that are disrupting those hard-working Aussies out there in our communities. They're nothing more than economic vandals. And at the end of the day, there should be no place for this. And I say to the minister, stop applauding the protesters, start applauding the police, because our police have arrested those people that you've applauded.
It's so crazy, Paul. Well, at least, as you say, the police did their job, but it can't have been easy when their police minister is basically recruiting people to come and join the queue of people they've got to arrest.
Well, that's it, Andrew. I mean, it just beggars belief. And I think everyone is just absolutely horrified from understanding that we have a police minister that is in that particular role, a role that has a huge responsibility, and is out there now applauding protesters. I mean, this is just unbelievable. I mean, here we are with protesters at the port of Newcastle. They've actually, blocked ships from entering, ships from leaving. Then they ended up, after their 30-hour protest, they got in their kayaks, they got in their canoes, they got in their little catamarans, and they went out there and started to, block the ships. And all they are doing is putting, our police lives at risk. They're putting their own life at risk. And what's extraordinary is the fact that we had people from the age of 15 up to 97 that were involved in these protests. So I say to the minister, you should hang your head in shame by backing these protesters that have done nothing but actually be economic vandals. They're nothing short of buffoons. And Adam Bandt, I mean, seriously, he's calling them heroes. I mean, this guy's on another planet at the end of the day. Andrew, this guy is out of touch with reality. He's out of touch with people that are actually working every day to make a living, to bring home some dollars, to keep food on the table.
Yeah, well, if I was going to fault the police operation on one point, it's this. They didn't arrest Adam Bandt and make a point of that, but he might have considered that a mark of honour. But seriously, a politician deliberately flouting the laws, that shouldn't be. I mean, what should the voters then think of the laws that the politicians are passing, that they too are optional?
Well, it's a bad look. I mean, it's hypocritical. I mean, here you are with politicians out there putting in legislation, bringing on bills to the parliament, and actually trying to, keep our community safe and to back our police in. And here we are, with the police minister who's actually applauding these protesters. Here we are with Adam Bandt, who's actually going out there on a canoe, defying the bills and the laws that we have in this place. I mean, they should actually, get the full maximum fine thrown at them, because at the end of the day, if they get let off, and this is the biggest fear, our police now go and do all the processing, they put all the paperwork in, and what we find is that, these people that are being arrested get a slap on the wrist, and you know what? They'll go and do it again. So we need to make sure that those people that have been arrested are going to be charged and they face the full force of the law.
And Paul Toole, it wasn't even a renewable canoe that Adam Bandt was paddling. It wasn't made of wood, it wasn't made of paper, it wasn't made of leaves or anything like that. It was a damn thing made of hydrocarbons. I mean, for heaven's sake. Paul Toole, thank you so much for your time. After the break, has the transgender fashion actually peaked? there's been a big drop in people thinking they're in the wrong body. Plus, Winston Peters is back today as New Zealand's Deputy Prime Minister. And as a Bolt Report regular, he's going to smash the country's woke race laws. He'll be along for a chat. New Zealand had an election 6 weeks ago, but it was only today that the new Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, was sworn in. And alongside him, the new Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, back again after weeks of haggling over who got what in this coalition government and what they'd all agree to do, the three main parties. And Winston Peters joins me now. Winston Peters, great to see you again and congratulations. How do you feel?
Well, thank you very much. It's been a very exhausting campaign to get there in the first place. And the coalition talks were very arduous as well. But we've put it together and we're very confident about where we're going in the future.
Now, I noticed that this new government is going to fight back against the official racism that the previous Labor government put in. This was a big crusade of yours during the campaign as well and before that. What are your priorities here?
Well, our priorities are not to disown our history, but not to manufacture what it means so that in the end we don't end up with a thing called equality. In the end, the Treaty of Waitangi was about everybody in this country called New Zealand being equal citizens, whether they've been here for 900,000 years or whether they arrived legally yesterday. So it's about nationhood, it's about being a citizen and what a citizen owes to their country and what the country owes them. And we'll not get there by a concoction of woke, dare I say it, activist ideas, where in the end, some people, like Animal Farm, are more equal than others.
Right, so you're declaring war on the idea of co-governance where bodies are divided by race and 50% say goes to Maori, 50% non-Maori. You're also saying English first on government departments and government communications, cutting back on the Maori language in terms of official documents and pronunciation and pronouncements and buildings and titles, right?
Well, look, first of all, as someone who's always believed that multilingualism is great for one's intellect, and we've always been supportive of that. But in the end, all communication is about understanding. And if you're going to enforce a certain language where most people, and I mean 90% plus, don't understand the department they're referring to or the idea or concept they're referring to, then maybe, just maybe, your communication system has been subjected to some sort of plan that is pushing a racial agenda but not understanding and comprehension. It's pretty plain common sense, actually, but that's where we've got to. And a lot of people who have pushed this under the radar, unmandated, unelected agenda just hate the consequences of being fronted and face down.
Well, I noticed a few journalists at your press conference today were a bit spicy about it all as well, but I noticed you, in your trademark way, didn't let them get away with that. I enjoyed that. It's going to be entertaining. But you're also back as Foreign Minister, Winston Peters. Now, the previous government tried getting much closer to China. I was critical. I thought they were getting too close. Your former foreign minister even said that the Taniwha, a giant serpent of Maori mythology, was like the Chinese dragon, a symbol of leadership and, a bond there with China. What approach are you going to take?
Well, the same approach I've always taken, and it goes like this. Whether we were dealing, when I was first in Foreign Affairs a long time ago or now, with Niue or China, size is not the important matter. Respect is. Whether countries are larger than yours or smaller than yours, if we're going to have an international engagement where the rules of law matter and all people matter, then respect and fairness is critical. And what I'm saying to China, and they'll know it before I even start, again, is that we respect them and we expect them to respect us. In the same way as when we deal with the Blue Continent and Pacific people, or indeed all around the world, we walk in with the same view. No one is inferior to us and no one is superior to us by count of numbers.
Winston Peters, your Prime Minister dismayed me by going along with the flow on global warming during the campaign, agreeing there was a climate emergency and all that kind of stuff. That said, during the negotiations, it turned out that he wasn't going to put the new Minister for Climate Change in the cabinet. That's good. Where are you on making New Zealand, and particularly its farmers, slash carbon emissions?
Well, the reality is that as we go forward in the next 30 years, we're going to possibly need 40% more food, so to speak. And to do that, then it is critical that food production is protected. Now, the Paris Accord of 2015 specifically said that. And all I wanted those countries who were there in Paris in 2015 to remember what they said and ensure that food production doesn't come at, in terms of their demands, at enormous cost of loss to New Zealand, and dare I say it, all food-producing nations.
So take it you're not keen on hitting farmers with even more onerous, we had, excuse the language, fat tax and all that kind of stuff on cows. You're not interested in pushing that hard?
Well, no, the reality is, though, that with dietary change and indeed new science, you can get a dramatic drop already, and the science is there. So let's give these farmers a chance to get there without making these awful demands, which just says, all cows are bad, let's get rid of them. Because the rest of the world will not stop having cows, not stop having agricultural products. We'll just cost our economy so much. Now, again, let's get the science in front of us. Let's use it to the max, and I'm certain we can get there. And not go ahead with this alarmist type of approach, which has besotted so much of the university-controlled world, so to speak, and not the business end and the taxpayer end and the worker end of our survivorship.
Winston Peters, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show on your first day as Deputy Prime Minister. Appreciate it. The transgender movement. Maybe I should call it a fashion, because I wonder if it's peaked. You take Victoria, the two specialists in helping people supposedly change gender, two specialist hospital units, have noticed the first drop in referrals to them in years, from 1,441 2 years ago to 1,271 last year, the drop of 1 in 7. But at the same time, the Victorian Labor government is pushing the transgender thing along by funding the training of more GPs to prescribe hormones to transgender people as young as 16. Now, they won't even, or from 16, they won't even have to get the approval of trained psychiatrists to start handing out these hormones in most cases. Joining me is Andrew Amos, an academic psychiatrist, who's co-authored a recent paper that we talked about here in the journal Australasian Psychiatry, warning that there was perhaps too much politics and not enough evidence in helping children change gender. Andrew Amos, thank you so much indeed for your time again. Do you think, why do you think there is this drop? The clinics say that, oh, we don't know, but it does suggest to me that it might now just be less fashionable now to say that you're transgender, you're in the wrong body.
Oh, well, thanks, Andrew. You've given me some tough acts to follow with John Howard last week and Winston Peters this week. But look, as far as transgender goes, I may be less trusting than you, but I can't decide whether the clinics aren't releasing the evidence because they don't know what it means or because they do know, but it doesn't fit their narrative. But what is certain is that we don't have any high-quality research on this area, and that means it's impossible to rule out the theory that many or even most of these kids have been influenced by their mates, and now that their mates are losing interest in gender, less kids are reporting these problems.
I can't help but suspect you are absolutely correct. I mean, if they had a better idea, they probably would tell us. But when you say that, I wonder if this suggests that we may see a trend soon of young Australians saying, well, actually, now I regret my transition. Are you wondering about that?
Look, again, I suspect that one of the reasons it's so difficult to get good data from these clinics is because they don't want people to know the truth. But certainly what we do know is that when less activist researchers have done research in this area, they have given wildly higher estimates of things like detransitioning than researchers who work with advocates. It may in fact be more than half. So the lack of good data makes it very difficult to predict what's going to happen. But my gut instinct certainly is that we will be seeing a lot more young people detransitioning in the next few years.
Well, the lack of data goes back to our original interview where you talked about the politics in this field. Training, to the other side of the argument, the article we saw today, training more GPs to hand out hormones to transgender people from the age of 16 without even a psychiatrist's advice in many cases, that sounds to me rather dangerous.
Look, Andrew, I would go so far as to say that it's actually outrageous to ask GPs to do this in the community. I have enormous respect for GPs, but they are generalists. They're expected to cover all of medicine and bits of surgery. They can't be expected to deal with this highly specialised area safely. I also agree with the article in The Age that you're referring to today that palming this off on GPs is dangerous for the GPs themselves. So, in my opinion, there's so little evidence backing the guidelines for treating gender dysphoria that it might in fact be difficult for a GP to defend themselves against medical negligence claims when something goes wrong.
Well, that was going to be exactly where I was going to take you with my last question. Exactly that, because if you are going to get a retreat from this, and I'll say it again, fashion, and you are going to get more people with remorse, you are going to get more legal cases. That leaves a GP very exposed. So, yeah, I just wonder where a GP should go in this. What would be your advice to a GP that's got a client in front of them, they want to help their patients, say a patient saying, give me hormones?
Well, look, I think the article made it reasonably clear that the law in this area is not very well settled. If I was a GP, I would be extremely conservative in managing these kids. I'd be looking for advice from the experts, and I'd be very reluctant to take action by myself. So there's a very high risk of fairly severe side effects for these kids. A lot of them are in fairly traumatic situations, and there are a lot of comorbidities. So those are huge opportunities for problems to arise that might lead down that medico-legal sort of pathway. So my advice to GPs really would be leave this well alone until there's actually evidence on which to base your practice. I've been looking at the guidelines, and they are up front. They say we don't have the evidence to make these recommendations, and as a result, we're really going on clinician consensus.
Andrew Amos, thank you so much indeed for that sober warning. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. After the break, why Omid Scobie, Meghan Markle's mouthpiece, right? Why he says he'll never speak to me. Is it because he's a parasite of a parasite? Plus also the French president's wife meeting her husband when he was just 15 and she was his 40-year-old teacher. What have we done to offend Omid Scobie? Now, I did ask Scobie, the confidant and de facto propagandist for Meghan Markle, her voice to the world, to come talk about his latest book called Endgame. It's another dump on the royal family and how they were all so mean to poor old Meghan Markle, the poor grifter. Well, I have a message now from Scobie, from his publicist. It will not appear on Sky News Australia under any circumstances. Why, he didn't exactly say, but I don't think he need to. I think he realises that we see through him. He, to me, is a parasite on the parasite of the royal family's hide. Joining me from London is writer and commentator and broadcaster Esther Kraku. Esther, you're not my fallback position. You are my main person here. But what would I have missed from interviewing Omid Scobie? What blood-sucking revelations are in his book?
Well, I don't think we can call them revelations because I think we should take anything that comes out of the heavily surgically enhanced Omid Scobie's mouth with a grain of salt. He knows that the royal family effectively don't have a right to reply, so he can say whatever he wants. I do think it's a bit strange, though, because Harry and Meghan have repeatedly allegedly said that they want to distance themselves from the soap opera drama that is the royal family. And yet they've allowed Omid Scobie to release this unofficial autobiography of what actually went on in the royal family between the Sussexes and the royal family, which is a bit strange. I mean, he hasn't said anything incredibly revolutionary. He's talked about, apparently there was not just one member of the royal family that questioned the skin color of Harry and Meghan's child, but two. And I found it a bit strange because I just thought, if you've ever been around a black family, you know that they will speculate with impunity about the color of your child's skin if you have a child with someone who's not of your race. It's perfectly normal and common. I don't think it's racist. I mean, Meghan Markle's mother was in an interracial relationship. Would her family members have been called racist if they speculated about what Meghan Markle would have looked like? So these are the kinds of things that are coming out of his gutter book. He's not shied away from the fact that it's being released tomorrow, so he's definitely upping the promo there. But trust me, you haven't missed anything by not interviewing Omid Scobie.
Now, before I get onto politics, one more question that fascinates me. The wife of French President Emmanuel Macron, Brigitte, very unusual for her. Now, spoken of when she fell in love with her husband. Now, she was 40 at the time, married, and a teacher. He was just 15 and her student, right, 25-year gap. Now, in Australia, she would risk jail time, to be honest, but she says, oh, well, my head was in a mess. For me, such a young boy was crippling, so it's all about her. She was in a terrible mess and blah, blah. Well, should it matter now, Esther, that years down the track, and they seem happily married, obsessively, apparently I read the other day that they barely go 90 minutes of a day without talking to each other, that a woman of 40 had a relationship with a 15-year-old student?
I mean, it should matter because we know what would happen if the roles were reversed, or more accurately, if the genders were reversed. If you had a 40-year-old man married with 3 children falling for his student and a classmate of one of his children who's the age of 15, you know the media speculation around that would be terrible. We know that the age of consent in France is actually 15, so she's been very fortunate, or should I say lucky, in that regard. But it's just creepy, it's strange, and we obviously know that there are double standards going on here. I will say, though, that the French have a very interesting relationship when it comes to their leaders and their personal lives. I seem to remember the funeral of François Mitterrand, former president, whose wife and mistress were both at his funeral. So this is not anything new in French politics.
No, that's true. We must allow for cultural differences here. We're broad-minded. Now, as to the politics side of things, in Australia, we have had more than 500,000 immigrants come in a single year, 540,000 to be precise. And the government's acting, well, it's no big deal, 540. In Britain, which is more than twice our size of population, you've had 740 immigrants. That's only 200,000 more than us, but there, that is a political scandal. What has been the reaction?
I mean, the reaction is just, obviously one of disappointments. The Tories have quite clearly failed. They actually had to adjust expectations of immigration because they had it down to around 600,000. So they've had well over 150,000 more people. That's about the size of, half of Birmingham coming into the country every year, which is scandalous. I mean, under the 13 years of a Labour government, you had 3.5 million people allowed into this country, and that was seen as, completely shocking. And you've seen, just under half of that number in the space of 2 years. So it's completely ridiculous. Now, we have to recognize the fact that over half of these people that are coming over are dependents. So for people saying that we need these people, some of whom happen to be florists, I kid you not, we need them because our economy depends on them. Or actually, are they sucking up more out of our system than they're adding to it? Because they have dependents who rely on our NHS and our education system and public infrastructure, which is just not keeping up with this demand. And we know that big business likes mass migration because it has a downward effect on wages. So clearly people are not buying the lie that we need this kind of migration, especially at this level. It's completely unsustainable.
We have the same, tricks played here. We need to have immigrants come in, be skilled labour to build all the infrastructure we need because of all the immigrants coming in. Plus, we also need people to wipe bottoms in aged care homes. Can you imagine what that does? We just need unskilled people prepared to wipe backsides. I mean, it's ridiculous. But around Europe, immigration's become huge. You've had the Dutch election last week, fought an immigration, anti-immigration party, the biggest party to come out ahead, Geert Wilders. France, it's big. Sweden, it's big. Germany, it's big. How much do you think all this is due to the protests now out of Palestine? People looking at these protests thinking, whoa, let's close the gates.
The thing is, well, people can see when the standard of their lives and the quality of their lives are rapidly changing because of declining public services. You know, they don't have to be blind to know that if I, for instance, have a better chance of playing for Manchester United than seeing my GP, something is quite clearly wrong. And you can only pull the wool over people's eyes for so long. So they're just recognizing that clearly we're not buying the lie. I mean, I worked as a care worker, actually, and all the people that I worked with, I think only like sort of 1 in 5 were actually British. And I just thought, I don't have a problem with this, but clearly this is not sustainable.
No, it is not. Esther Cracker, always great to see you. This is sustainable. Your appearance is here. Thank you so much indeed for your time. That's it from me. Chris Kenny is next. Good night.